On a bright December morning, long ago, two thinly clad children were kneeling upon the bank of a frozen canal in Holland. The sun had not yet appeared, but the grey sky was parted near the horizon, and its edges shone crimson with the coming day. Most of the good Hollanders were enjoying a placid morning nap. Even Mynheer van Stoppelnose, that worthy old Dutchman, was still slumbering in beautiful repose. Now and then some peasant woman, poising a well-filled basket upon her head, came skimming over the glassy surface of the canal, or a lusty boy, skating to his day's work in the town, cast a good-natured grimace upon the shivering pair as he flew along. Meanwhile, with many a vigorous puff and pull, the brother and sister, for such they were, seemed to be fastening something upon their feet. Not skates, certainly, but clumsy pieces of wood, narrowed and smoothed at their lower edge, and pierced with holes, through which were threaded strings of rawhide. These queer-looking affairs had been made by the boy Hans. His mother was a poor peasant woman, too poor even to think of such a thing as buying skates for her little ones. Rough as these were, they afforded the children many a happy hour upon the ice. And now, as with cold red fingers our young Hollanders tugged at the strings, their solemn faces bending closely over their knees, no vision of impossible iron runners came to dull the satisfaction glowing within. In a moment the boy arose, and with a pompous swing of the arms and a careless "Come on, Gretel," glided easily across the canal. "Ah, Hans," called his sister plaintively, "this foot is not well yet. The strings hurt me on last market day, and now I cannot bear them tied in the same place." "Tie them higher up, then," answered Hans, as, without looking at her, he performed a wonderful cat's cradle step on the ice. "Well, how can I? The string is too short." Giving vent to a good-natured Dutch whistle, the English of which was that girls were troublesome creatures, he steered toward her. "You are foolish to wear such shoes, Gretel, when you have a stout leather pair. Your klompen would be better than these." "Why, Hans, do you forget? The father threw my beautiful new shoes in the fire. Before I knew what he'd done, they were all curled up in the midst of the burning peat. I can skate with these, but not with my wooden ones. Be careful now." Hans had taken a string from his pocket. Humming a tune as he knelt beside her, he proceeded to fasten Gretel's skate with all the force of his strong young arm. "Oh, oh!" she cried, in real pain. With an impatient jerk Hans unwound the string. He would have cast it upon the ground in true big brother style, had he not just then spied a tear trickling down his sister's cheek. "I'll fix it, never fear," he said with sudden tenderness, "but we must be quick. The mother will need us soon." Then he glanced inquiringly about him, first at the ground, next at some bare willow branches above his head, and finally at the sky, now gorgeous with streaks of blue, crimson, and gold. Finding nothing in any of these localities to meet his need, his eyes suddenly brightened as, with the air of a fellow who knew what he was about, he took off his cap and, removing the tattered lining, adjusted it in a smooth pad over the top of Gretel's worn-out shoe. "Now," he cried triumphantly, at the same time arranging the strings as briskly as his benumbed fingers would allow, "can you bear some pulling?" Gretel drew up her lips as if to say, "Hurt away," but made no further response. In another moment they were laughing together as, hand in hand, they flew along the canal, never thinking whether the ice would bear or not, for in Holland ice is generally an all-winter affair. It settles itself upon the water in a determined kind of way, and so far from growing thin and uncertain every time the sun is a little severe upon it, it gathers its forces day by day and flashes defiance to every beam. Just then a clear, quick voice was heard calling, "Hans? Gretel?" "It's the mother," said Hans, looking solemn in an instant. As soon as the children turned from the canal, they could see their parents' cottage. Their mother's tall form, arrayed in jacket and petticoat and close-fitting cap, stood like a picture in the crooked frame of the doorway. Had the cottage been a mile away, it would still have seemed near. In that flat country, every object stands out plainly in the distance. The chickens show as distinctly as the windmills. Indeed, were it not for the dikes and the high banks of the canals, one could stand almost anywhere in Middle Holland without seeing a mound or a ridge between the eye and the jumping-off place. None had better cause to know the nature of these same dykes than Dame Brinker and the panting youngsters now running at her call. Raff Brinker, the father of Gretel and Hans, had for years been employed upon the dykes. It was at the time of a threatened inundation, when, in the midst of a terrible storm, in darkness and sleet, the men were labouring at a weak spot near the Viermijk sluice, when he fell from the scaffolding and was taken home insensible. From that hour he never worked again. Though he lived on, mind and memory were gone. Gretel could not remember him otherwise than as the strange, silent man, whose eyes followed her vacantly whichever way she turned. But Hans had recollections of a hearty, cheerful-voiced father, who was never tired of bearing him upon his shoulder, and whose careless song still seemed echoing near when he lay awake at night and listened. Dame Brinker earned a scanty support for her family by raising vegetables, spinning, and knitting. Once she had worked on board the barges plying up and down the canal, and had occasionally been harnessed with other women to the towing rope of a canal boat plying between Broek and Amsterdam. But when Hans was growing strong and large, he had insisted upon doing all such drudgery in her place. Besides, her husband had become so very helpless of late that he required her constant care. Although not having as much intelligence as a little child, he was yet strong of arm and very hearty, and Dame Brinker had sometimes great trouble in controlling him. Ah, children, he was so good and steady, she would say, and as wise as a lawyer. Even the burgomaster would stop to ask him a question. And now, alack, he doesn't know his wife and little ones. You remember the father, Hans, when he was himself a great brave man, don't you? Yes, indeed, mother. He knew everything and could do anything under the sun. And how he would sing! Why, you used to laugh and say it was enough to send the windmills dancing. So I did. Oh, bless me, how the boy remembers. Gretel, child, take that knitting needle from your father, quick. He'll get it in his eyes, maybe. And put the shoe on him. His poor feet are like ice half the time, but I can't keep 'em covered. All I can do. And then, half wailing, half humming, Dame Brinker would sit down and fill the low cottage with a whir of her spinning wheel. Nearly all the outdoor work, as well as the household labour, was performed by Hans and Gretel. At certain seasons of the year, the children went out day after day to gather peat, which they would stow away in square, brick-like pieces for fuel. At other times, when homework permitted, Hans rode the towing horses on the canal, earning a few pennies a day, and Gretel tended geese for the neighbouring farmers. Hans was clever at carving in wood, and both he and Gretel were good gardeners. While they were busily assisting their mother on this cold December morning, a merry troop of girls and boys came spinning down the canal. There were fine skaters among them, and as the bright medley of costumes flitted by, it looked from a distance as though the ice had suddenly thawed and some gay tulip bed were floating along on the current. There was the rich burgomaster's daughter, Hilda van Gleck, with her costly furs and loose-fitting velvet sack, and nearby a pretty peasant girl, Annie Boeman, jauntily attired in a coarse scarlet jacket and a blue skirt just short enough to display the grey homespun hose to advantage. Then there was the proud Richie Corbus, whose father, Mynheer van Corbus, was one of the leading men in Amsterdam, and, flocking closely around her, Karl Schummel, Peter and Ludwig van Hulp, Jacob Poot, and a very small boy rejoicing in a tremendous name of Fürsten Valbert Schimmelpenninck. There were nearly 20 other boys and girls in the party, and one and all seemed full of excitement and frolic. Before long, our merry boys and girls were almost lost in the confusion of bright colours, the ceaseless motion and the gleaming of skates flashing back the sunlight. We might have known no more of them had not the whole party suddenly come to a standstill, and, grouping themselves out of the way of the passers-by, all talked at once to a pretty little maiden, whom they had drawn from the tide of people flowing toward the town. "Oh, Katrinka," they cried in a breath, "have you heard of it? The race! We want you to join." "What race?" asked Katrinka, laughing. "Don't all talk at once, please. I can't understand." Everyone panted and looked at Richard Corbus, who was their acknowledged spokeswoman.
"Why," said Richie, "we are to have a grand skating match on the 20th, on Mevrouw van Gleck's birthday. It's all Hilda's work. They are going to give a splendid prize to the best skater." "Yes," chimed in half a dozen voices, "a beautiful pair of silver skates, perfectly magnificent, with such handsome black straps and shining silver bells and buckles." "Who said they had bells?" put in the small voice of the boy with the big name. "I say so, Master Fust," replied Richie. "So they have." "No, I'm sure they haven't." "Oh, how can you say so? It's an arrow, and Mynheer van Corbis told my mother they had bells," came from sundry of the excited group. But Mynheer Furstenwald the Schimmelpenninck essayed to say the matter with a decisive, "Well, you don't any of you know a single thing about it. They haven't a sign of a bell on them. They—" Oh, and the chorus of conflicting opinion broke forth again. "The girls' pair are to have bells," interposed Hilda quietly, "but there is to be another pair for the boys with an arrow engraved upon the sides." "There, I told you so!" cried nearly all the youngsters in a breath. Katrinka looked at them with bewildered eyes. "Who is to try?" she asked. "All of us," answered Richie. "It'll be such fun, and you must too, Katrinka. But it's school time now. We'll talk it all over at noon. Oh, you will join, of course." Katrinka, without replying, made a graceful pirouette and, laughing out a coquettish, "Don't you hear the last bell? Catch me," darted off towards the schoolhouse, standing half a mile away on the canal. At noon our young friends poured forth from the schoolhouse, intent upon having an hour's practising upon the canal. They'd skated but a few moments when Karl Schummel said mockingly to Hilda, "There's a pretty pair just coming upon the ice. The little rag-pickers, their skates must have been a present from the king direct." Hilda laughed pleasantly and left him. After joining a small detachment of the racers and sailing past every one of them, she halted beside Gretel, who, with eager eyes, had been watching the sport. "What's your name, little girl?" Gretel, milady," answered the child, somewhat awed by Hilda's rank, though they were nearly of the same age. And my brother is called Hans." "What is it, young lady?" exclaimed Hans eagerly. "If there is any service I can do, any—" Oh, no," laughed Hilda, shaking off her embarrassment. "I only wish to speak to you about the grand race. Why do you not join it? You can both skate well, and the ranks are free. Anyone may enter for the prize." Gretel looked wistfully at Hans, who, tugging at his cap, answered respectfully, "Ah, milady, even if we could enter, we could skate only a few strokes with the rest. Our skates are hard wood, you see," holding up the sole of his foot, but they soon become damp, and then they stick and trip us." Gretel's eyes twinkled with fun, but she blushed as she faltered out timidly, Oh no, we can't join. But may we be there, my lady, on the great day, to look on?" "Certainly," answered Hilda, looking kindly into the two earnest faces, and wishing from her heart that she had not spent so much of her monthly allowance for lace and finery. She had but 8 shillings left, and they would buy but 1 pair of skates at the furthest. Looking down with a sigh at the 2 pairs of feet so very different in size, she asked, "Which of you is the better skater?" "Gretel," replied Hans promptly. "Hans," answered Gretel in the same breath. Hilda smiled. "I cannot buy you each a pair of skates, or even 1 good pair, but here are 8 shillings. Decide between you which stands the best chance of winning the race, and buy the skates accordingly. I wish I had enough to buy better ones. Goodbye." And with a nod and a smile, Hilda, after handing the money to the electrified Hans, glided swiftly away to rejoin her companions. Milady van Gleck," called Hans in a loud tone, stumbling after her as well as he could, for one of his skate strings was untied. Hilda turned, and with one hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun, seemed to him to be floating through the air, nearer and nearer. We cannot take this money," panted Hans, "though we know your goodness in giving it." "Why not, indeed?" asked Hilda, flushing. "Because," replied Hans, bowing like a clown, but looking with the eyes of a prince at the queenly girl, "we have not earned it." Hilda was quick-witted. She'd noticed a pretty wooden chain upon Gretel's neck. "Carve me a chain, Hans, like the one your sister wears." "That I will, lady, with all my heart. We have white wood in the house, fine as ivory. You shall have one tomorrow," and Hans hastily tried to return the money. No, said Hilda decidedly. "That sum will be but a poor price for the chain." And off she darted, outstripping the fleetest among the skaters. Hans sent a long, bewildered gaze after her. It was useless, he felt, to make any further resistance. "It is right," he muttered, half to himself, half to his faithful shadow Gretel. "I must work hard every minute and sit up half the night if the mother will let me burn a candle. But the change shall be finished. We may keep the money, Gretel. My little Gretel shall win the silver skates." Gretel couldn't help laughing with delight at the very idea. "Hans? Gretel?" called out a familiar voice. "Coming, mother!" And they hastened toward the cottage, Hans still shaking the pieces of silver in his hand. On the following day there was not a prouder nor a happier boy in all Holland than Hans Brinker, as he watched his sister with many a dexterous sweep, flying in and out among the skaters who at sundown thronged the canal. A warm jacket had been given her by the kind-hearted Hilda, and the burst-out shoes had been cobbled into decency by Dame Brinker. As the little creature darted backward and forward, flushed with enjoyment, and quite unconscious of the many wondering glances bent upon her, she felt that the shiny runners beneath her feet had suddenly turned earth into fairyland, while "Hans, dear, good Hans," echoed itself over and over again in her grateful heart. Good Dame Brinker. As soon as the scanty dinner had been cleared away that noon, she had arrayed herself in her holiday attire in honour of St. Nicholas. It will brighten the children, she thought to herself, and she was not mistaken. This festival dress had been worn very seldom during the past 10 years. Before that time it had done good service, and had flourished at many a dance and kermis, when she was known far and wide as the pretty Maitje Klink. The children had sometimes been granted rare glimpses of it as it lay in state in the old oaken chest. Faded and threadbare as it was gorgeous in their eyes, with its white linen tucker now gathered to her plump throat, and vanishing beneath the trim bodice of blue homespun, and its reddish-brown skirt bordered with black. The knitted woolen mitts and the dainty cap showing her hair, which generally was hidden, made her seem almost like a princess to Gretel, while Master Hans grew staid and well-behaved as he gazed. Soon the little maid, while braiding her own tresses, fairly danced round her mother in an ecstasy of admiration. "Oh, mother, 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 how pretty you are! Look, Hans, isn't it just like a picture?" "Just like a picture," assented Hans cheerfully. "And how do you like the cap?" turning her head from side to side. "Oh, ever so much, mother. It is beautiful. See, the father is looking." Was the father looking? Alas, only with a dull stare. His wife turned toward him with a start, something like a blush rising to her cheeks, a questioning sparkle in her eye. The bright look died away in an instant. "No, no," she sighed, "he sees nothing. Come, Hans," and the smile crept faintly back again. "Don't stand gaping at me all day and the new skates waiting for you at Amsterdam." "Ah, mother," he answered, "you need many things. Why should I buy skates?" "Nonsense, child. The money was given you on purpose, or the work was. It's all the same thing. Go while the sun is high." "Yes, and hurry back, Hans," laughed Gretel. "We'll race on the canal tonight if the mother lets us." At the very threshold he turned to say, "Your spinning wheel wants a new treadle, mother." "You can make it, Hans." "So I can. That will take no money, but you need feathers and wool and meal and—" There, that will do. Your silver cannot buy everything. Ah, Hans, if our stolen money would but come back on this bright St. Nicholas Eve, how glad we would be. Only last night I prayed to the good saint to never give the thieves a wink of sleep till they brought it back, to be sure, if he's power to do such things, or else to brighten our wits that we might find it ourselves. Not a sight have I had of it since the day before the dear father was hurt, as you well know, Hans." "That I do, mother," he answered sadly, "though you've almost pulled down the cottage in searching." "Aye, but it was of no use," moaned the dame. "Hiders make best finders." Hans started. Do you think the father could tell aught?" he asked mysteriously. "Aye, indeed," said Dame Brinker, nodding her head. "I think so, but that is no sign. I never hold the same belief in the matter 2 days. 1,000 guilders. Oh, whatever did become of them?" "Up with you, Hans. There you sit gaping and the day a-wasting," added Dame Brinker tartly, blushing to find that she had been speaking too freely to her boy. "It's high time you were on your way." Hans kissed his mother's plump cheek, rosy and fresh yet, in spite of all her troubles. "My mother is the best in the world, and I would be right glad to have a pair of skates. But," and as he buttoned his jacket, he looked in a troubled way towards a strange figure crouching by the hearthstone, "if my money would bring a doctor from Amsterdam to see my father, something might yet be done." A doctor would not come, Hans, for twice that money, and it would do no good if he did. Ah, how many guilders I once spent for that, but the dear good father would not waken. It is God's will. Go, Hans, and buy the skates. Brook, with its quiet, spotless streets, its frozen rivulets, its yellow brick pavements and bright wooden houses, was nearby. It was a village where neatness and show were in full blossom, but the inhabitants seemed to be either asleep or dead. When crossing the Eye, whom should Hans see skating towards him but the great Dr. Bookman, the most famous physician and surgeon in Holland. Hans had never met him before, but he had seen his engraved likeness in many of the shop windows of Amsterdam. It was a face that one could never forget. Thin and lank, though a born Dutchman, with stern blue eyes and queer compressed lips that seemed to say no smiling permitted, he certainly was not a very jolly or sociable-looking personage, nor one that a well-trained boy would care to accost unbidden. But Hans was bidden, and that, too, by a voice he seldom disregarded, his own conscience. "Here comes the greatest doctor in the world," whispered the voice. "God has sent him. You have no right to buy skates when you might, with the same money, purchase such aid for your father." The wooden runners gave an exultant squeak. Hundreds of beautiful skates were gleaming and vanishing in the air above him. He felt the money tingle in his fingers. The old doctor looked fearfully grim and forbidding. Hans' heart was in his throat, but he found voice enough to cry out just as he was passing, "Mynheer Bookman!" The great man halted, and sticking out his thin underlip, looked scowlingly about him. Hans was in for it now. Mynheer," he panted, drawing close to the fierce-looking doctor, "I knew you could be no other than the famous Bookman. I have to ask a great favour." "Humph," muttered the doctor, preparing to skate past the intruder. "Get out of the way. I've no money. Never give it to beggars." "I am no beggar, mynheer," retorted Hans proudly, at the same time producing his mite of silver with a grand air. "I wish to consult with you about my father. He is a living man, but sits like one dead. He cannot think. His words mean nothing, but he is not sick. He fell on the dikes." "Hey? What?" cried the doctor, beginning to listen. Hans told the whole story in an incoherent way, dashing off a tear once or twice as he talked, and finally ending with an earnest, "Oh, do see him, mynheer. His body is well, it's only his mind. I know this money is not enough, but take it, mynheer. I will earn more, I know I will. Oh, I will toil for you all my life, if you will but cure my father." What was the matter with the old doctor? A brightness like sunlight beamed from his face. His eyes were kind and moist. The hand that had lately clutched his cane as if preparing to strike was laid gently upon Hans' shoulder. "Put up your money, boy. I do not want it. We will see your father. It is a hopeless case, I fear. How long did you say?" Ten years, mynheer," sobbed Hans, radiant with sudden hope. "Oh, a bad case, but I shall see him. Let me think. Tomorrow I start for Leiden, to return in a week. Then you may expect me. Where is it?" "A mile south of Brook, mynheer, near the canal. It is only a poor, broken-down hut. Any of the children thereabout can point it out to your honour," added Hans with a heavy sigh. "They are all half afraid of the place. They call it the idiot's cottage." "That will do," said the doctor, hurrying on with a bright backward nod at Hans. "I shall be there." "A hopeless case," he muttered to himself, "but the boy pleases me." And, scowling more darkly than ever, the doctor pursued his silent way. Again Hans was skating toward Amsterdam on the squeaking wooden runners. Again his fingers tingled against the money in his pockets. Again the boyish whistle rose unconsciously to his lips. "Shall I hurry home," he was thinking, "to tell the good news, or shall I get the new skates first? Phew, I think I'll go on." And so Hans bought the skates. The next day the children had skated about an hour, keeping aloof from the others, quite contented with each other, and Gretel had exclaimed, "Ah, Hans, how beautiful, how fine, to think that we both have skates. I tell you the stork brought us good luck," when they heard something. It was a scream, a very, very faint scream. No one else upon the canal observed it, but Hans knew its meaning too well. Gretel saw him turn white in the moonlight as he hastily tore off his skates. "The father!" he cried. "He has frightened our mother." And Gretel ran after him toward the house as rapidly as she could. "4 days now have passed. Dr. Bookman is there, talking in a low tone with a stout young man who listens intently. The stout young man is his student and assistant. Hans is there also. He stands near the window, respectfully waiting until he shall be accosted. "You see, Vollenhoven," said Dr. Bookman, "it is a clear case of—" and here he went off into a queer jumble of Latin and Dutch that I cannot conveniently translate. After a while, as Vollenhoven looked at him rather blankly, the learned man condescended to speak to him in simpler phrase. "It is probably like Rip Donderdunk's case," he explained in a low, mumbling tone. "He fell from the top of Voppelploot's windmill. After the accident, the man was stupid and finally became idiotic. In time, he lay helpless like yon fellow on the bed, moaned too like him, and kept constantly lifting his hand to his head. My learned friend von Chopham performed an operation upon this Donderdunk and discovered under the skull a small dark sac which pressed upon the brain. This had been the cause of the trouble. My friend von Chopham removed it, a splendid operation, you see, according to Celsus." And here the doctor again went off into Latin. "Did the man live?" asked the assistant respectfully. Dr. Bookman scowled. "That's of no consequence. I believe he died, but why not fix your mind on the grand features of the case? Consider a moment how—" and he plunged into Latin mysteries more deeply than ever. "But," gently persisted the student, who knew that the doctor would not rise to the surface for hours unless pulled at once from his favourite depths, "this poor fellow on the bed, mynheer, do you think you can save him?" "Oh, indeed, certainly," stammered the doctor, suddenly perceiving that he had been talking rather off the point. "Oh, certainly, that is, I hope so." "If anyone in Holland can, mynheer," murmured the assistant with honest bluntness, "it is yourself." The doctor looked displeased, growled out a tender request for the student to talk less, and beckoned Hans to draw near. This strange man had a great horror of speaking to women, especially on surgical matters. "One can never tell," he said, "what moment the creature will scream or faint." Therefore he explained Raff Brinker's case to Hans, and told him what he believed should be done to save the patient. Hans listened attentively, growing red and pale by turns, and throwing quick, anxious glances toward the bed. "It may kill the father, did you say, mynheer?" he exclaimed at last in a trembling whisper. "Humph, this is no new illness. The same thing growing worse every instant. Pressure on the brain will take him off soon like that," said the doctor, snapping his fingers. "And the operation may save him," pursued Hans. "How soon, mynheer, can we know?" Dr. Bookman grew impatient. "In a day, perhaps an hour. Talk with your mother, boy, and let her decide. My time is short." Dame Brinker had long been the head of her house in every sense. Many a time she had been very stern with Hans, ruling him with a strong hand and rejoicing in her motherly discipline. Now she felt so weak, so helpless. It was something to feel that firm embrace. There was strength even in the touch of that yellow hair. She turned to her boy imploringly. "Oh, Hans, what shall I say?" "Say what God tells thee, mother," answered Hans, bowing his head. One quick questioning prayer to heaven rose from the mother's heart. The answer came. She turned towards Dr. Bookman. "It is right, mynheer. I consent." "Humph," grunted the doctor, as if to say, "You've been long enough about it." Then he conferred a moment with his assistant, who listened with great outward deference, but was inwardly rejoicing at the grand joke he would have to tell his fellow students. He had actually seen a tear in old Bookman's eye. Meanwhile, Gretel looked on in trembling silence. But when she saw the doctor open a leathern case and take out one sharp, gleaming instrument after another, she sprang forward. It was recess hour. At the first stroke of the schoolhouse bell, the canal seemed to give a tremendous shout and grow suddenly alive with boys and girls. The sly thing shining so quietly under the noonday sun was a kaleidoscope at heart, and only needed a shake from that great clapper to start it into dazzling changes. Dozens of gaily clad children were skating in and out among each other, and all their pent-up merriment of the morning was relieving itself in song and shout and laughter. In the height of the fun, one of the children called out, "What is that?" "Where? What?" cried a dozen voices. "Why, don't you see that dark thing over there by the idiot's cottage?" "I don't see anything," said one. "I do," shouted another. "It's a dog." "Where's any dog?" put in a squeaky voice that we've heard before. "It's no such thing. It's a heap of rags." "Pooh! Foost!" retorted another gruffly. "That's about as near the fact as you ever get. It's the goose girl Gretel looking for rats." "Well, what of it?" squeaked Foost. "Isn't she a bundle of rags, I'd like to know?" Just then a general chase after three of the biggest boys of the school was proposed, and friend and foe, frolicsome as ever, were soon united in a common cause. Only one of all that happy throng remembered the dark little form by the idiot's cottage. Poor, frightened Gretel. She was not thinking of them, though their merry laughter floated lightly toward her, making her feel like one in a dream. How loud the moans were behind the darkened window. What if those strange men were really killing her father? The thought made her spring to her feet with a cry of horror. "Oh, no," she sobbed, sinking upon the frozen mound of earth where she had been sitting. "Mother is there and Hans. They will care for him." But how pale they were, and even Hans was crying. Gretel, shivering with cold, buried her face in her arms and cried as if her heart would break. Suddenly a firm hand was laid upon her shoulder. "Get up, little girl," cried a kind voice. "This will not do for you to lie here and freeze." Gretel slowly raised her head. She was so sleepy that it seemed nothing strange to her that Hilda van Vleck should be leaning over her, looking with kind, beautiful eyes into her face. She had often dreamed it before. But she'd never dreamed that Hilda was shaking her roughly, almost dragging her by main force, never dreamed that she heard her saying, "Gretel, Gretel, Brinker, you must wake. I think the doctor would let you in now, he certainly would. Is your father so very ill?" "Oh, my lady," cried Gretel, weeping afresh, "he is dying, I think. There are 2 doctors in with him at this moment, and the mother has scarce spoken today." Hilda listened. The cottage was very near, but not a sound could be heard. Something told her that Gretel was right. They ran to the window. An angel could not have entered the cottage more noiselessly. Gretel, not daring to look at anyone, slid softly to her mother's side. The room was very still. She could hear the old doctor breathe. She could almost hear the sparks as they fell into the ashes on the hearth. The mother's hand was very cold, but a burning spot glowed on her cheek, and her eyes were like a deer's, so bright, so sad, so eager. At last there was a movement upon the bed, very slight, but enough to cause them all to start. Dr. Bookman leaned eagerly forward. Another movement. The large hand, so white and soft for a poor man's hand, twitched, then raised itself steadily toward the forehead. It felt the bandage, not in a restless, crazy way, but with a questioning movement that caused even Dr. Bookman to hold his breath. Then the eyes opened slowly. "Steady, steady," said a voice that sounded very strange to Gretel. "Shift that mat higher, boys. Now throw on the clay. The waters are rising fast. No time to..." Dame Brinker sprang forward like a young panther. She seized his hands and, leaning over him, cried, "Raff, Raff, boy, speak to me." Is it you, Mietje?" he asked faintly. "I've been asleep, hurt, I think. Where is little Hans?" "Here I am, father," shouted Hans, half mad with joy. But the doctor held him back. "He knows us," screamed Dame Brinker. "Great God! He knows us! Gretel, Gretel, come see your father." In vain Dr. Bookman commanded silence and tried to force them from the bedside. He could not keep them off. Hans and his mother laughed and cried together as they hung over the newly awakened man. Gretel made no sound, but gazed at them all with glad, startled eyes. Her father was speaking in a faint voice. "Is the baby asleep, Mietje?" "The baby!" exclaimed Dame Brinker. "Oh, Gretel, that is you!" And he called Hans little Hans, 10 years asleep.
Oh, mynheer, you have saved us all. He has known nothing for 10 years. Good, mein Frau, said the doctor in a subdued tone as he drew on his thick woolen mittens. There must be perfect quiet, you understand. This is truly a most remarkable case. I shall come again tomorrow. Give the patient no food today, and bowing hastily, he left the cottage, followed by his assistant. Hans went out also. May God bless you, mynheer, he said, blushing and trembling. I can never repay you, but if— Yes, you can, interrupted the doctor crossly. You can use your wits when the patient wakes again. This clacking and snivelling is enough to kill a well man, let alone one lying on the edge of his grave. If you want your father to get well, keep him quiet. So saying, Dr. Bookman, without another word, stalked off to meet his coach, leaving Hans standing there with eyes and mouth wide open. When Dr. Bookman called the next day at the Brinker cottage, he could not help noticing the cheerful, comfortable aspect of the place. An atmosphere of happiness breathed upon him as he opened the door. Dame Brinker sat complacently knitting beside the bed. Her husband was enjoying a tranquil slumber, and Gretel was noiselessly kneading rye bread on the table in the corner. The doctor did not remain long. He asked a few simple questions, appeared satisfied with the answers, and after feeling his patient's pulse, said, very weak yet, Frau, very weak indeed. He must have nourishment. You may begin to feed the patient, not too much, but what you do give him, let it be strong and of the best. Black bread we have, mynheer, and porridge, replied Dame Brinker cheerily. They've always agreed with him well. Tut, said the doctor frowningly, nothing of the kind. He must have the juice of fresh meat, white bread, dried and toasted, good Malaga wine, and the man looks cold. Give him more covering, something light and warm. Strange that the visit of their good benefactor should have left a cloud, yet so it was. Gretel frowned, an anxious, childish frown, and kneaded the bread dough violently without looking up. Dame Brinker hurried to her husband's bedside, leaned over him, and fell into silent but passionate weeping. In a moment Hans entered. "Why, mother," he whispered in alarm, "what ails thee? Is the father worse?" She turned her quivering face toward him, making no attempt to conceal her distress. "Yes, he is starving, perishing. The doctor said it." Hans turned pale. "What does this mean, mother? We must feed him at once. Here, Gretel, give me the porridge." "Nay," cried his mother distractedly, yet without raising her voice. "It may kill him. Our poor fare is too heavy for him. Oh, Hans, he will die. The father will die if we use him this way. He must have meat and sweet wine and a deck bed. Oh, what shall I do? What shall I do?" she sobbed, wringing her hands. "There is not a penny in the house." Perhaps there's some mistake, Hans thought. The doctor surely would have known that meat and sweet wine were not at our command. And yet the father looks weak, very weak, he certainly does. I must get work. If Mynheer van Holp were back from Rotterdam, I could get plenty to do, but Master Peter told me to let him know if he could do aught to serve us. I shall go to him at once. Oh, if it were but summer! Hans hastened toward the canal. Soon his skates were on, and he was skimming rapidly towards the residence of Mynheer van Holp. "The father must have meat and wine at once," he muttered. "But how can I earn the money in time to buy them today? There's no other way but to go as I promised to Master Peter. What would a gift of meat and wine be to him? When the father is once fed, I can rush down to Amsterdam and earn the morrow's supply." Then other thoughts came, thoughts that made his heart thump heavily and his cheeks burn with a new shame. It is begging, to say the least. Not one of the Brinkers has ever been a beggar. Shall I be the first? Shall my poor father, just coming back into life, learn that his family have asked for charity? He, always so wise and thrifty. A few moments more, and the skates were again swinging from his arm. He was running toward the cottage. His mother met him at the door. "Oh, Hans," she cried, her face radiant with joy. "The young lady has been here with her maid. She brought everything, meat, jelly, wine, and bread, a whole basketful. Then the doctor sent a man from town with more wine and a fine bed and blankets for the father. Oh, he will get well now. God bless them." "God bless them," echoed Hans, and for the first time that day his eyes filled with tears. That evening Ralph Brinker felt so much better that he insisted upon sitting up a while on the rough, high-backed chair by the fire. For a few moments there was quite a commotion in the little cottage. Hans was all-important on the occasion, for his father was a heavy man and needed something firm to lean upon. "Be off with ye," he said, with something like his old smile. Gretel had never seen it before. "Does a man want to be lifted about like a log? I tell you, before 3 suns I shall be on the dikes again. Yes, Micha, and I feel much better. Our money was well saved, Frau. Did it last through all these 10 years? I've not got it, Rav. How long did the money last, Hans? I could not hear your mother. What did she say?" "I said, Raff," stammered Dame Brinker in great distress, "that it was all gone." Well, wife, do not fret at that. 1,000 guilders is not so very much for 10 years, and with children to bring up. But it has helped to make you all comfortable. Have you had much sickness to bear?" "No," sobbed Dame Brinker, lifting her apron to her eyes. "Tut, woman, why do you cry?" said Raff kindly. "We will soon fill another pouch when I am on my feet again. Lucky I told you all about it before I fell." "Told me what, man?" "Why, that I buried that money. In my dream just now it seemed I had never said aught about it." Dame Brinker started forward. Hans caught her arm. "Hist, mother," he whispered, hastily leading her away. "We must be very careful." Then, while she stood with clasped hands waiting in breathless anxiety, he once more approached the cot. Trembling with eagerness, he said, "That was a troublesome dream. Do you remember when you buried the money, father?" "Yes, my boy, it was before daylight on the same day I was hurt. Jan Kamphausen said something the sundown before that made me distrust his honesty. He was the only one living beside mother who knew we had saved 1,000 guilders, so I rose up that night and buried the money. Blockhead that I was ever to suspect an old friend." "I'll be bound, father," pursued Hans in a laughing voice, motioning to his mother and Gretel to remain quiet, "that you've forgotten where you buried it." "Not I, indeed, but good night, my son, I can sleep again." Hans would have walked away, but his mother's gestures were not to be disobeyed, so he said gently, "Good night, father. Where did you say you buried the money? I was only a little one then." "Close by the willow sapling behind the cottage," said Ralph Brinker drowsily. "Ah, yes, north side of the tree, wasn't it, father?" No, the south side." "Ah, you know the spot well enough, you rogue. Like enough you were there when your mother lifted it. Now, son, easy. Shift this pillow. So. Good night." "Good night, father," said Hans, ready to dance for joy. The moon rose very late that night, shining in, full and clear, at the little window, but its beams did not disturb Ralph Brinker. He slept soundly, and so did Gretel. As for Hans and his mother, they had something else to do. After making a few hurried preparations, they stole forth with bright, expectant faces, bearing a broken spade and a rusty implement that had done many a day's service when Ralph was a hale worker on the dikes. It was so light out of doors they could see the willow tree distinctly. The frozen ground was hard as stone, but Hans and his mother were resolute. Their only dread was that they might disturb the sleepers in the cottage. They soon succeeded in making an impression, one opening, and the rest was not so difficult. By this time Hans began to tremble, but not with cold. He had penetrated a foot deep for quite a space on the south side of the tree. At any moment they might come upon the treasure. "Strange that the dear father should have put it down so woeful deep," said Dame Brinker in rather a provoked tone. "Ah, the ground was soft enough then, I warrant." Hour after hour mother and son worked on. The hole grew larger and deeper. Clouds began to gather in the sky, throwing elfish shadows as they passed. Not until moon and stars faded away and streaks of daylight began to appear did Major Brinker and Hans look hopelessly into each other's faces. They had searched thoroughly, desperately, all round the tree, south, north, east, west. The hidden money was not there. Hans went up and down the streets of Amsterdam that day looking for work. He succeeded in earning a few pence by assisting a man who was driving a train of loaded mules into the city, but he could not secure steady employment anywhere. He would have been glad to obtain a situation as porter or errand boy, but though he passed on his way many a loitering, shuffling urchin laden with bundles, there was no place for him. Some shopkeepers had just supplied themselves, others needed a trimmer, more lightly built fellow. They meant better dressed, but did not choose to say so. Others told him to call again in a month or two, when the canals would probably be broken up, and many shook their heads at him without saying a word. The sun had gone down quite out of sight when our hero trudged hopefully toward the tiny hut-like building, known of old as the Idiot's Cottage. Rough Brinker still slept soundly. His wife took a small block of peat from her nearly exhausted store and put it upon the embers. "Mother! Mother! See here!" shouted Hans. "Holy St. Bavil!" exclaimed the dame, springing over the doorstep. "What ails the boy?" Come quick, mother!" he cried in great excitement. "Don't you see? This is the spot, right here on the south side of the stump. Why didn't we think of it last night? The stump is the old willow tree, the one you cut down last spring because it shaded the potatoes. That little tree wasn't here when father... Huzzah!" Dame Brinker could not speak. She dropped on her knees beside Hans just in time to see him drag forth the old stone pot. He thrust in his hand and took out a piece of brick, and then another, then the stocking and the pouch, black and mouldy, but filled with the long-lost treasure. Such a time, such laughing, such crying, such counting after they went into the cottage. It was a wonder that Raff did not waken. His dreams were pleasant, however, for he smiled in his sleep. Dame Brinker and her children had a fine supper, I can assure you. No need of saving the delicacies now. "We'll get father some nice fresh things tomorrow," said the dame as she brought forth cold meat, wine, bread and jelly, and placed them on the clean pine table. "Sit by, children, sit by." The 20th of December came at last, bringing with it the perfection of winter weather. All over the level landscape lay the warm sunlight. It tried its power on the lake, canal, and river, but the ice flashed defiance and showed no sign of melting. The very weathercocks stood still to enjoy the sight. This gave the windmills a holiday. Nearly all the past week they'd been whirling briskly. Now, being rather out of breath, they rocked lazily in the clear, still air. Catch a windmill working when the weathercocks have nothing to do. There was no end to grinding, crushing, and sawing for that day. It was a good thing for the millers near Brook. Long before noon they concluded to take in their sails and go to the race. Everybody would be there. Already the north side of the frozen eye was bordered with eager spectators. The news of the great skating match had travelled far and wide. Men, women, and children in holiday attire were flocking toward the spot. Some wore furs and wintry cloaks or shawls, but many, consulting their feelings rather than the almanac, were dressed as for an October day. The site selected for the race was a faultless plain of ice near Amsterdam, on that great arm of the Zuyder Zee, which Dutchmen, of course, must call the Eye. The townspeople turned out in large numbers. Strangers in the city deemed it a fine chance to see what was to be seen. Many a peasant from the northward had wisely chosen the 20th as the day for the next city trading. It seemed that everybody, young and old, who had wheels, skates, or feet at command, had hastened to the scene. You know quite a number among the spectators. High up in yonder pavilion erected over the border of the ice are some persons whom you have seen very lately. In the centre is Madame Van Gleck. It is her birthday. She has the post of honour. There are some familiar faces near the white columns. Lambert, Ludwig, Peter, and Karl are all there, cool and in good skating order. Hans is not far off. Evidently he is going to join in the race, for his skates are on. Karl is more indignant than ever about it, but as 3 other peasant boys have entered, Hans is not alone. 20 boys and 20 girls. The latter by this time are standing in front, braced for the start, for they are to have the first run. Hilda, Ritchie, and Katrinka are among them. 2 or 3 bend hastily to give a last pull at their skate straps. It's pretty to see them stamp, to be sure that all is firm. Hilda is speaking pleasantly to a graceful little creature in a red jacket and a new brown petticoat. Why, it is Gretel. What a difference those pretty shoes make, and the skirt, and the new cap. 20 girls are formed in a line. The rollicking music has ceased. A man, whom we shall call the crier, stands between the columns and the first judges stand. He reads the rules in a loud voice. The girls and boys are to race in turn until one girl and one boy have beaten twice. They are to start in a line from the united columns, skate to the flagstaff line, turn, and then come back to the starting point, thus making it a mile at each run. A flag is waved from the judges' stand. Madame Van Gleck rises in her pavilion. She leans forward with a white handkerchief in her hand. When she drops it, a bugler is to give the signal for them to start. The handkerchief is fluttering to the ground. Hark! They are off. Phew, how fast they go. The wave of cheers is coming back again. Now we can see. Katrinka is ahead. She passes the Van Hope pavilion. The next is Madame Van Gleck's. That leaning figure gazing from it is a magnet. Hilda shoots past Katrinka, waving her hand to her mother as she passes. What is that flash of red and grey? Hurrah! It is Gretel. Gretel has passed them. She has won. Gretel Brinker, 1 mile, shouts the crier. While the girls are resting, some crowding eagerly around our frightened little Gretel, some standing aside in high disdain, the boys form a line. Mynheer Van Gleck drops the handkerchief this time. The buglers give a tremendous blast. The boys have started. Halfway already? Did you ever see the like? Hans is ahead. The others are pressing close. A tall figure darts from among them. He passes the red cap, he passes Ben, then Karl. Now it is an even race between him and Hans. Karl, gathering his powers, has whizzed between them and passed the goal. Karl Schummel, 1 mile, shouts the crier. Soon Madame Van Gleck rises again. The falling handkerchief starts the bugle, and the bugle, using its voice as a bowstring, shoots off 20 girls like so many arrows. Katrinka is there and Hilda, but Gretel and Richie are in the rear. Gretel is wavering, but when Richie passes her, she starts forward afresh. Now they are nearly beside Katrinka. Hilda is still in advance. She is almost home. The crier's voice is heard once again. Hilda Van Gleck, 1 mile. Once more the bugle blows a terrific blast. It sends off the boys like chaff before the wind. Dark chaff, I admit, and in big pieces. There are 3 boys in advance this time, and all abreast, Hans, Peter, and Lambert. Karl soon breaks the ranks, pushing through with a whiff. Fly, Hans, fly, Peter, don't let Karl beat again. Karl, the bitter Karl, the insolent. Van Moonen is flagging, but you are as strong as ever. Hans and Peter, Peter and Hans, which is foremost? Peter Van Hope, 1 mile, calls the crier. The same buzz of excitement as before, while the judges take note. The girls are to skate their 3rd mile. The bugle thrills through them again. Who is first? Not Richie, Katrinka, Annie, nor Hilda, nor the girl in yellow, but Gretel. Gretel, the fleetest sprite of a girl that ever skated. She was but playing in the earlier race. Now she is in earnest. In vain the crier lifts his voice. He cannot be heard. He has no news to tell. It is already ringing through the crowd. Gretel has won the silver skates. With natural pride, Hans turns to see if Peter Van Hope is witnessing his sister's triumph. Peter is not looking toward them at all. He is kneeling, bending his troubled face low and working hastily at his skate strap. Hans is beside him at once. Are you in trouble, mynheer? Oh, Hans, that you? Yes, my fun is over. I tried to tighten my strap to make a new hole, and this botheration of a knife has cut it nearly in 2. Mynheer, said Hans at the same time pulling off a skate, you must use my strap. Oh, not I indeed, Hans Brinker, cried Peter, looking up, though I thank you warmly. Go to your post, my friend. The bugle will sound in a minute. Mynheer, pleaded Hans in a husky voice, you have called me your friend. Take this strap, quick, there is not an instant to lose. I shall not skate this time, indeed I am out of practice. Mynheer, you must take it. And Hans, blind and deaf to any remonstrance, slipped his strap into Peter's skate and implored him to put it on. Come, Peter, cried Lambert from the line, we are waiting for you. For Madame's sake, pleaded Hans, be quick. She is motioning to you to join the racers. There, the skate is almost on. Quick, mynheer, fasten it. I could not possibly win. The race lies between Schummel and yourself. "You are a noble fellow, Hans," cried Peter, yielding at last. He sprang to his post just as the white handkerchief fell to the ground. The bugle sends forth its blast, loud, clear, and ringing. Off go the boys. The chase turns in a cloud of mist. It's coming this way. Who is hunted now? Mercury himself. It is Peter, Peter van Hulp. Fly, Peter, Hans is watching you. He is sending all his fleetness, all his strength into your feet. Your mother and sister are pale with eagerness. Hilda is trembling and dares not look up. Fly, Peter. The crowd has not gone deranged. It is only cheering. The pursuers are close upon you. Touch the white column. It beckons. It is reeling before you. Peter van Hulp, shouted the crier. But who heard him? Peter van Hulp, shouted 100 voices, for he was the favourite boy of the place. Huzzah! Huzzah! Our story is nearly told. Time passes in Holland just as surely and steadily as here. In that respect, no country is odd. To the Brinker family, it has brought great changes. Hans has spent the years faithfully and profitably, conquering obstacles as they arose, and pursuing one object with all the energy of his nature. If often the way has been rugged, his resolution has never failed. Hans studied surgery with the great Dr. Bookman. Were you in Amsterdam today, you might see the famous Dr. Brinker riding in his grand coach to visit his patients, or it might be you would see him skating with his own boys and girls upon the frozen canal. Ralph Brinker and his wife have been living comfortably in Amsterdam for many years, a faithful, happy pair, as simple and straightforward in their good fortune as they were patient and trustful in darker days. They have a summer house near the old cottage, and thither they often repair with their children and grandchildren on the pleasant summer afternoons when the pond lilies rear their queenly heads above the water. The story of Hans Brinker would be but half told if we did not leave him with Gretel standing near. Dear, quick, patient little Gretel. What is she now? Ask old Dr. Bookman. He will declare she is the finest singer, the loveliest woman in Amsterdam. But, lest you forget a tiny form trembling and sobbing on the mound before the Brinker cottage, ask the Van Glecks. They will never weary telling of the darling little girl who won the silver skates.